Story 1. I worked for a movie theater chain in 1996, and my boss got a VHS copy of Jesus vs. Santa Claus at some industry event. We watched that video a dozen times and laughed our heads off. About 6 months later, South Park debuted on Comedy Central, and we were very excited to see it had been picked up. Story 2. We weren't allowed to have cola much growing up, but we drank a ton of seltzer water. I kept drinking it as an adult, and people made fun of me for how weird it was because it's not something people casually drank. They thought it was either a mixer, like they acted as if I was drinking straight margarita mix, or something from a fancy health store. Then LaCroix came along, or whatever it was that made seltzer suddenly cool a few years ago. I mean, I'm glad it's even more common with more flavors and stuff, but I used to get teased so much for it. Story 3. Sent an electronic mail message from my car using an HP 48G calculator and a ham radio in 1993. That feat got published in a technical magazine. Nothing about that first sentence sounds cool, but I know the G is for gangster. Thanks for all the love, upvotes, and awards. To answer the common questions, I wrote a terminal emulator for the 48G that communicated with a terminal node controller, which is like a modem to interface between the calculator and radio. The message went through the ham radio packet network until it hit a node with an internet bridge. The car was my old 1988 Mustang that I bought for $1,800. Lastly, the source for G is for gangster as it relates to HP 48G comes from the incredible Nerd Rap Entertainment System album by YT Cracker. Story 4. I had a friend in high school ask me in math class one day if I wanted to go to a concert with her that night. Her sister had extra tickets and she thought I would want to go. It was a New Kids on the Block comeback tour and I said sure, why not? My mom did not mind me going. We sat around chatting before the show, and the opening act was some woman who appeared to be drunk, but her music was really good. Nobody had ever heard of her, and she only did a few songs, but her music was a total earworm that was hard to get rid of once it took hold. I went home that night and searched for her single, Just Dance, and downloaded it immediately. And that's how I discovered Lady Gaga. Story 5. I used to record myself playing video games when I was around 5 or 6 years old when my parents gave me the video cassette recorder they replaced in the living room. Because of this early hobby, a friend and I did video game playthroughs on YouTube in 2007. We were certainly not the first, but we were very early. We also used a capture card right from the start rather than recording the screen, which looked terrible. Story 6. I remember when you could read every comic featuring Deadpool in under 2 hours. This was around the time I said, an Iron Man movie? And they got some wash-up to play him? This will go over worse than Daredevil. Story 7. I came across the Lonely Islands website when I was about 11 or 12 in 2002 or 2003, before Andy Samberg or the other two, Akiva and Yorma, were big. They had a video where they spliced all these old Nintendo Entertainment System games together into a skit, and it was friggin' hilarious. Story 8. I first saw The Simpsons when it was a sketch on the Tracy Ullman Show and thought it was the funniest thing I had ever seen. I was ecstatic when I learned they were making a full cartoon of it. I watched it religiously up until about season 15 or 16 before I finally switched to every once in a while, like we all eventually did. Story 9. I was attending Comic-Con before most people knew it existed. Show up the day you want, buy a ticket, and go in and shop. I have some incredible collectible movie memorabilia from back then. Never thought it would turn into the enormous event it has become. Story 10. I remember going around to stores trying to find all 6 issues of Infinity Gauntlet. I had read one while waiting for my mom to finish grocery shopping, and I was hooked. That made me a dork in the early 1990s, but now it's a billion-dollar worldwide phenomenon. Amazing. Story 11. I was a beta tester for Gmail. I still have the welcome email from 2004. In an ironic twist of fate, I became a Google employee 15 years later, and now I get to beta test all kinds of cool stuff, even things my product area doesn't work on. Story 12. Hating Bill Cosby. Had to do volunteer work at the local Jell-O museum for 30 hours to graduate high school in 2008. He used to be the spokesperson for Jell-O. I had to listen to him talk about Jell-O in old commercials for 30 hours on a loop. Edit. I should also mention it's the town where a bunch of kids acquired a mass conversion disorder and all thought they had Tourette's. I actually have mild Tourette's, so that's another thing I did before it was cool. Story 13. I had over 300 Bitcoin when it was around $3. I spent almost all of it on drugs and a fake ID, and then lost the rest when the Silk Road got seized. Keeps me up at night. Story 14. Don't want to brag, but I bought some N95 masks the second week of January. Edit. Well, some do, some don't, but I've never been in this position before and am unsure of the etiquette, so thanks for the upvotes and the awards. From a 62-year-old Canadian woman who's a bit overwhelmed. Story 15. I saw the pilot episode of South Park. I thought it was the funniest thing ever. I showed it to a coworker who said, "That's the stupidest thing I've seen." Fast forward to when South Park becomes popular, and he comes in and says, "Have you seen this hilarious cartoon called South Park?" I said, "Do you remember that pilot episode one showed you?" He was quiet for a while after that. Story 16. Snapchat. I downloaded it when it was in its early stages and then deleted the app shortly after because none of my friends were on it. I still have people asking me how I got my username, Osnapio. Story 17. I was in marching band with Markiplier. He was my trumpet section leader. It's weird seeing all these memes and all these famous people talking about a guy I was in high school with. Story 18. I had computers back when all they had was 8 kilobytes of random access memory and a cassette drive for programs, and you would often spend all night typing in the program printed in a magazine to play it, just to then have to go through it all due to a typing error. Tandy TRS-80 Model 1 around 1980. Computers didn't really become popular at home until the Commodore 64 and similar models. I also had the Sorcerer Acorn and an old MSI 8080 back then too. It helped a bit when the school finally got Apple IIE computers. Coincidentally, that's the last Apple computer I've used. I can see the use for them, but they would personally send me crazy compared to a personal computer. Story 19. I started watching Smosh videos when they had just a couple of them uploaded. They were probably the first YouTubers I watched religiously. Their first food battle videos were hilarious. There was nothing like good old Smosh. Story 20. I probably had one of the first top 10 channels back in 2011 where I would post top 10 video content about games. I gave up because it was too much editing and work, but a few years later those top 10 channels became very popular. Story 21. I went to a bar a long time ago illegally because I was below drinking age to see this neo-punk band play. I liked it enough that I paid for one of their cassettes, pre-compact disc. The band was Green Day. Story 22. Since my dad is a huge anime fan, we bought a pack of 500 black medical masks because we saw people in Japan using them for sickness and allergies normally. A year later, the pandemic hit. Being an avid anime fan paid off, my friends. Once I wore one of these masks to school, and the principal confiscated it because it was distracting. Even though I had a mild cough and sore throat. I bet you feel really foolish right now, Mr. Malavar. Story 23. I was out for the night back when I was 17, 18, 19. A friend and I went to a good pub in Oxfordshire where we thought we would have a chance to meet some girls. We ended up getting drunk, taking ecstasy, and listening to the band, who were pretty good. After their set, we stepped out of the pub for a quick joint. The band walked over and asked for a toke. We ended up spending the rest of the evening in the back of their van, smoking weed and drinking. It turned out that the band was an unknown indie rock group called Radiohead. A couple of weeks later, Creep went international. I've been a fan ever since. Story 24. Lived in Korea in the 1990s and was really into Dragon Ball Z comics. Moved to the United States in 1995 and no one knew what it was. By the time I was in high school, it was all the rage. Story 25. I got stoned with John Mayer in a college town before he released an album. He was playing the blues at a club in front of 100 people, and I only caught the last song. We got high and he gave me a CD and wrote on it. A few weeks later, I played the CD and quickly tossed it out. So, I was an early adopter of John Mayer playing the blues and throwing out his subpar studio albums. Story 26. When I started college in 1993, the first real big party I went to was a sorority party with a band. I was there before they went on, and when I saw they had a saxophone set up on stage, I, having played alto saxophone in high school, set my beer down on the stage in front of where the saxophone player would be. They wound up being really good live, and a few weeks later the Dave Matthews Band's first album came out, and I bought it on the first day. I'll never forget taking that CD home during Christmas break and playing it for high school friends who said, "What is this?" The next year they all apologized because they were all into them once they got popular. I saw them a few times, but after they got super big, I really didn't like any of their new material and quit listening to them. The last time I saw them, I remember seeing Daisy Fuentes outside the theater interviewing people after the show and had a feeling they were about to be a big MTV band. However, from time to time I'll hear an old tune of theirs and will remember when I thought they were very cool. Edit. I didn't stop listening to them because they got popular. Their song styles changed after the second album and it just wasn't for me. We all change and evolve. Story 27. I was into vinyl before it made a comeback. And since nobody in the 90s or early 2000s wanted their records anymore, I basically got over 500 records for free or nearly free. Story 28. I was reading Harry Potter from day one. I remember how this happened so clearly. My dad's birthday landed on the same day that the book was released in the United States, September 1st, 1998, and we got him a gift certificate to Barnes & Noble, among a few other things. The very next day, my dad and I went to Barnes & Noble. He picked two books. One was a New York Mets coffee table book, and the other was the newly released Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, which he handed to me. There were stacks and stacks of them on a display table right at the front of the store. He mentioned that he had read an article about how good the book was a few weeks prior and that it would be releasing in the United States soon. We were in the store for all of 5 minutes. I read the first 2 chapters on the way home and was immediately hooked. I swear I read that book a dozen times before going to the midnight release of Chamber of Secrets the following year. Story 29. I remember looking for an Ask Jeeves alternative search engine back in the day for some schoolwork. I found lots of unsatisfactory ones, but there was one with a simple design without all the bells and whistles in friendly primary colors. Google. Story 30. Saw Metallica for my first concert in 1985 on the Ride the Lightning tour in Austin, Texas. If I remember the other bands that night, they were some local band, Wasp and Armored Saint. Story 31. One of mine is Minecraft. I played it when it was just bare bones, nothing. Also, I was into Owl City before I believed the rest of the world was into Owl City. Story 32. One of my brothers graduated high school in 1994, and one of his friends moved out to California from New Hampshire. When he came back to visit, he brought a cassette tape of early Sublime. 2 to 3 years later, they got big. 5 to 6 years later, everyone in junior high had that Sun t-shirt and was trying to say that they discovered the best band ever. A similar thing happened years later with the Dropkick Murphys, but I'm not really into them, so I don't mind letting that one go. Story 33. I saw Tegan and Sarah when they were an opening act that they didn't even bother to turn down the lights for. Now it's like $60 for a ticket to their shows. Story 34. I once did a Google search for Eminem and it came back with 0 results. I was an editor at AllMusic at the time and emailed my higher-ups to tell them he needed a listing as soon as possible. Story 35. Mind you, I was not your basic preppy white boy, but a dark-skinned Mexican with no sense of style. My mom heard these were the next fashion item and bought the shoes the summer before they became popular. Throughout the year, in middle school, I got made fun of for my poor people shoes. I eventually got so frustrated and threw them away. August comes around, and on the first day of school, everyone is praising each other about their Sperry's. Even if I went back and bought or even found my old pair, I would have been teased for copying their style. Story 36. I watched Avatar, The Last Airbender, when it was running live as an adult, and people criticized me for watching a children's cartoon. Since this comment is receiving a lot of attention, I want to talk about Lake Laogai. The term Laogai comes from Laodong Gaizao, which translates into reform through labor, and were actual Chinese forced labor prison camps. Anyone who was seen as a counter-revolutionary by the Chinese Communist Party was sent to Laogai, where they were forced to produce goods that were exported to the West with all the profit going to the state. The camps also served to reform political and ideological thoughts of prisoners to align with the Communist Party's ideology. While the camps are no longer called laogai, they still exist as prisons today. Story 37. Curl care. My mom was always knowledgeable and taught me how to properly care for my hair before all the jazzy products came out. Now, everyone who called me poodle and fuzzy brains in school when straightening your hair was popular is asking me about what I use. Story 38. I'd hate to say it, but Fortnite before it turned into Fortnite, but I was playing with a buddy who decided to hate it for some reason and stopped before it turned into Battle Royale. Story 39. The Pioneer Woman. I found her blog years ago when it was just a good blog. She's great, but to be honest, I think she's better in the written word than she is actually speaking in front of the camera. Story 40. This account is rather recent, but I discovered the platform in its infancy. It had less content back then, but the discussions were better. Then mainstream caught up,